In a world where fandoms collide, where epic stories shape our lives, and where passion for all things geeky connects us across time and space. Welcome to the Geek Unified Theory. Hosted by the one and only Jeffrey Harlan, your guide through the worlds of heroes, villains, and everything in between. Grab your controller, pick up your favorite graphic novel, and settle in for the ride. It's time for the Geek Unified Theory. Hey geeks, welcome to Geek Unified Theory, Episode 3. I'm your host, Jeffrey Harlan. This episode is brought to you by my novel, Invasion, Book 1 of the Protectorate. John just wanted to be a normal teenager, but he had superpowers. As Pyre, he's the leader of a team of young heroes. Supervillains and life and death decisions are just part of his life now. Does he have what it takes to lead his team and save the world when aliens invade? Invasion is available on my site, jeffreyharlan.com, and worldwide at retailers like Amazon and Kobo. In this episode, we're looking at 1980s cartoons, a defining era in animation that changed TV, pop culture, and the way that we think about Saturday morning. Toy lines were a huge influence on the rise of 1980s cartoons. You had toy lines like He-Man and Masters of the Universe, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, and many, many more. These all got their own cartoons tying in with the toy line that aired on Saturday mornings. Some of the iconic shows that I mentioned. First off, we got He-Man. Science fiction and fantasy combined on an alien planet called Eternia, where the main character is secretly Prince Adam and then transforms through magic into He-Man. Basically, he's a superhero. G.I. Joe, also very heavily influenced by superheroes. It's more of military take on superheroes. Nobody has superpowers, but they're all military experts, best in their field, defending the world against terrorism in the form of Cobra. Transformers, absolute science fiction. You've got a toy line with transforming robots that turn into cars, planes, guns, music players, you name it. If it's an object, they could turn into it. They could be hiding anywhere in the world in plain sight. And they were aliens from another planet whose war brought them to Earth, where they crashed, lay dormant for millions of years, and when they woke up, their war started again in the shadows on Earth. We've also got shows like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This was based on a comic book that had come out earlier in the 1980s, and the cartoon was much different than the source material. And the basic conceit, you've got four teenage mutant turtles who have trained to become ninjas. In the comics, it was a lot darker. They killed Shredder in the first issue, and it needed a lot of changes to translate into a cartoon that would be acceptable on broadcast television. So, if you notice, they never actually used any of their iconic weapons to fight in the cartoon. Leonardo only used his katanas to slice up pizzas. Donatello would bat things like baseballs or something with his bow, but you never actually saw any of them use their weapons to fight. And also, the foot soldiers, while human members of the Foot Clan in the comics, were turned into androids in the cartoon. Because, hey, you could beat up and kill and destroy an android no problem because it's not human. As the decade progressed, we got revivals of shows like the Super Friends. We also got uh, new shows that were not just action like these others, also started doing comedies. You got shows like DuckTales and Inspector Gadget, and they brought new and existing characters and took them and did new things with them. DuckTales brought in Uncle Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, occasionally had an appearance by Donald, as well as a bunch of new characters, and they did a little bit of action and adventure, kind of like Indiana Jones kind of stuff, but they also had a lot of humor in them. Inspector Gadget was just a plain, straight up spoof. Some of the cultural impact of these shows. You have catchphrases.
By the power of Grayskull! Yo, Joe! Transform and roll out!
You had merchandising, not just the toys, but things like the backpacks, the lunch pails, the t-shirts, and you name it, if they could slap the picture on there and sell it to you, they absolutely would. These cartoons became hugely popular, and some of that had to do with toy companies investing in making cartoons that were, let's be honest, they were 30-minute commercials for their toys and their products. But then they brought in, for example, for G.I. Joe and Transformers, they brought in the creative minds at Marvel Comics to create backstories and a whole scenario around these toys. For G.I. Joe, they took some ideas that were unused from a concept that had been originally based on the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And so they changed S.H.I.E.L.D. into G.I. Joe, and they changed Hydra into Cobra. If you just file off the serial numbers, you can see where it's the basics are still there. Eventually, though, all good things must come to an end. A lot of things led to the decline and fall of cartoons in the 80s. Among those, oversaturation of the market. There was just so much being pumped out that eventually also led to a decline in quality because they were putting out so much stuff they really couldn't work to the same standard as they did at first. There is a changing economic landscape too. In the mid 80s, there was a recession. And as a result of that, parents weren't able to buy a lot of the stuff that these kids wanted from the shows that they watched. So as a result, some of the funding to make these shows dried up. Another big nail in the coffin was government regulations. They already had some regulations from the 1971 ban on what they called host selling, which restricted the advertising related to the program that was being aired. This meant that they couldn't have ads for Transformers toys during an episode of the Transformers cartoon. They would have those ads during other cartoons. That was no problem. But when they were showing Transformers, you couldn't have an ad for Transformers toys because the impressionable minds of children, they would then see the cartoon, then they'd see the toy, and they'd be like, I want that toy. There was a greater enforcement of that in the mid 80s as a result of some outcry from parents and activist groups. Another thing that happened was in 1987, the Reagan administration rescinded the Fairness Doctrine. While this is probably best known for the eventual rise of Fox News and other similar outlets. This also had the effect of relaxing many of the restrictions that had been placed on children's programming, like the 1971 ban on host selling. 3 years later, the Children's Television Act of 1990 was passed, and that mandated educational content, and it further restricted advertising during children's programs. This made it a much harder market for these companies and these stations to operate in. One example was the iconic children's show of the 80s, Captain Kangaroo, being pushed out of its weekday morning slot slowly but surely by the morning news programs that were becoming more popular. It got switched to Saturday mornings, where it then had to compete with Transformers, G.I. Joe, all these other shows. Now, the legacy of these cartoons, it's not just, oh, they existed in the 80s. They've had a huge impact on everything that's come since. Stories have become more and more sophisticated over the decades. The animation quality has improved by leaps and bounds. There have been dozens of reboots of these shows. I mean, Transformers alone, there have been so many different series, and they all have their own independent continuities for the most part. They've each brought something different to the table. G.I. Joe, many different versions. He-Man, She-Ra, they have both been brought back in different forms. Thundercats had a couple of different revivals. One, extremely serious, another, more kid-friendly. It's had a huge impact on pop culture too. Just, you can go outside and say, Yo Joe to somebody, and they know exactly what you're talking about. There's also a huge market for collectibles, not just new stuff, but also the original toys. Collectors are always looking for copies of these toys as they were originally made in the best condition that they can find them in. And they will pay a lot of money to get these toys. So the 80s had a huge impact on children's entertainment, both at the time and everything that's come since. Before the 80s, you had shows like Super Friends, but you also had things that are really painful to watch when you go back and try to watch them. Some of these old cartoons are just really dated. Um, but then you've also got some that were really good. You got Jetsons, you got the Flintstones, you got others like that. But those are very few and far between from the old cartoons before the 80s. 80s cartoons onwards, there have been a lot of fantastic programs, and that's part of the enduring legacy of the 80s cartoons.
This week in Geek. For the week of January 6th through 12th of 2025. On January 6th, it's Norman Reedus' birthday. He was born in 1969. He's probably best known for playing Daryl Dixon on The Walking Dead. January 7th, Nicolas Cage was born in 1964. And Jeremy Renner was born in 1971. January 8th, Stephen Hawking was born in 1942. January 9th is National Word Nerd Day. So everyone who geeks out about words, this is your day. January 10th is Peculiar People Day. And let's admit, we're all a little peculiar in some way. January 12th is National Hot Tea Day in the United States. This is the day for you to get out your teacups and have some tea, Earl Grey, hot. January 12th is also Rob Zombie's birthday. He was born in 1965. For the week of January 13th through the 19th, 2025, January 13th is National Clean Your Desk Day in the United States. Over time, we all accumulate a lot of stuff on our desks. Papers, movies, other knickknacks. Things just kind of accumulate, and before you know it, there is hardly any open space for you to put anything else. So this is your day to clean that up and organize it and get it nice and neat so you can mess it up all over again. January 13th, Liam Hemsworth was born in 1990. He was Gale in the Hunger Games franchise. January 14th is World Logic Day. We all love Mr. Spock and his embrace of logic, and this is the day for us to embrace logic. January 15th, Batman the movie premiered in 1966. January 15th is also National Hat Day in the United States. This is the perfect day if you are a pack lead. Hopefully your hat is big enough. January 16th is the anniversary of the premiere of Star Trek Voyager in 1995. It's also Appreciate a Dragon Day. January 17th is Popeye Day. This is also the year that he enters the public domain because his first appearance was in January 17th of 1929. James Earl Jones was born on January 17th in 1931, and Jim Carrey was born that day in 1962. January 18th is National Gourmet Coffee Day in the United States. This is certainly Captain Catherine Janeway's favorite holiday.
Coffee. The finest organic suspension ever devised. It's got me through the worst of the last 3 years. I beat the Borg with it.
January 18th is also Dave Bautista's birthday. He was born in 1969. January 19th, Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809, and Katie Sagal, perhaps best known to geeks as the voice of Leela on Futurama, was born in 1954.
I used to watch these cartoons, and it was something that my brother and I could bond over. There were very few things that we got along with about as children, but we would fight a lot. But when it came to watching Transformers, Robotech, G.I. Joe, we would sit down and watch the shows together, and usually not get into any fisticuffs. So if you have anything similar that you'd like to share, I would love to hear it. Thanks for listening. Join us next time when we discuss the evolution of comic books. Be sure to like and subscribe. Visit us at our website, geekunifiedtheory.com, and on social media at facebook.com/geekunifiedtheory, Instagram at Geek Unified Theory, and Blue Sky at geekunifiedtheory.com. Recorded and mastered by Jeffrey Harlan. Music by Ovani Sound and Hyperreal Records. Used under license. Geek Unified Theory is a production of Confluent Press Audio. Copyright 2025. Jeffrey Harlan, DBA Confluent Press. All rights reserved.